Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. This week, it's a killer doll versus with Bride of Chucky versus Pin from 1988. We got two movies to tackle, so let's do some calls to action. First of all, we want to thank some new patrons over on our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/GenreVision. Adam and Steven. But I think we have to give a special shout out to somebody in Steven's life.
Yes, Steven's subscription to our Patreon premium content was given to him as a Father's Day gift by none other than his wonderful wife. We do not know her name, but Steven's wife, we thank you. This is really such an ego boost to the both of us to know that we are worthy of being given as a gift.
It's beautiful.
It really is very edifying.
It really put a pep in our step this week, as it always does when we get new patrons. So thank you, Adam and Steven, and Steven's awesome wife. As always, if you want to check out what we're doing over at Patreon, go to patreon.com/GenreVision, and you can see all of the awesome supplemental content that you get for all of our shows, that GenreVision, FinFlix, and Third Time's the Charm. And speaking of Third Time's the Charm, we got a new iTunes review from loyal listener Kevy Metal World. And Kevy Metal World says, good things do come in threes. 5 stars, great host, great concept. This is exactly the kind of podcast I would do if I were to do a podcast, which makes its existence a total joy for me because now I can listen to and enjoy someone else's hard work. So thank you so much, Kevy Metal World. That is such a boost to me and Danielle. And we've been having a really fun time doing that show. We're winding down our first season. And season 2 is going to be coming up. So make sure to go check that out and subscribe on all your favorite podcasting platforms. We also want to remind everybody that we have our Q&A episode coming up. And man, our last ask for questions for the Q&A, you guys delivered.
Yeah, you guys showed up. We got a whole bunch of questions to answer for our upcoming Q&A episode, which I believe is in mid-July. Yes, it's July 14th. So what we've decided to do is cut off questions on June 30th. Anything asked after June 30th, we cannot guarantee will appear on the Ask Us Anything episode. So if you do have questions that you have not yet asked for our Q&A episode, please do so. You can do that at GenreVision.com. Look for the Q&A post on the main page. It's got a little picture of the Riddler on it. Riddle me this, Batman. Riddle me all your Qs for our upcoming A's.
All right. It's time to do our Killer Doll versus, which we're obviously doing in honor of the upcoming release of both the Child's Play remake and Toy Story 4.
And Annabelle coming, what is it? Annabelle Homecoming. That's it.
That's not the title, but I like it better.
What is it? Annabelle Comes Home?
You got it.
Hey.
Close enough.
Hey. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Annabelle.
Well, I think we're in a humorous mood because our first movie tonight is Bride of Chucky. I think there was quite a gap in between Child's Play 3 and what eventually became known as Bride of Chucky. And Bride of Chucky, I would venture to say, is probably the fan favorite in the entire franchise.
Well, it's kind of like what happened with the Friday movies. Eventually, the Friday movies became Jason movies. What happened here is this became, this went from Child's Play to Chucky movies. And the goals of the film are fundamentally different. Is there still a killer doll in it? Yes. Does Chucky still kill people in kind of slashery fashion? Yes, but the movie has different goals. Chucky is now the film's protagonist, and a direct acknowledgement of what became the trend is that, the slasher villain eventually became the hero that everybody was rooting for. It was really the one continuing character from movie to movie. And then these new kids that they were adding in every movie, we knew were just fodder. So really that one continuous character that we were kind of rooting for to do cool things was the killer. Don Mancini knew this. Don Mancini is the creator of all the Child's Play characters. And that's what Bride of Chucky became, is a chance to build on him as a protagonist.
Well, and it's very important to remember that Bride of Chucky is a post-Scream movie, a pretty close to being post-Scream.
Well, I mean, look at the poster for Bride of Chucky. It is a direct spoof of the Scream poster.
Exactly. And Don Mancini has openly said he invited bringing more comedic elements into the series. He was totally ready to do that because he loves comedy, and he specifically loves farce. And there is an element of farce to Bride of Chucky. And I'm not meaning that in a derogatory way. I mean the academic definition of a farce.
Sure, but it's not like Evil Dead versus Evil Dead 2, where Evil Dead 2 is fundamentally the same scenario. Bride of Chucky presents a new scenario, and it's something that wouldn't really feel right as a Child's Play movie.
Right.
Instead, it becomes a totally new animal.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get pedantic, but there's also legal reasons why it's not called Child's Play.
Yes, I understand that. That's the reason why Jason Goes to Hell is not a Friday the 13th movie, or
yes,
Jason X is not a Friday the 13th movie. It's because the name is owned by somebody else.
Right. So there's things about that, but I do think your analysis stands, and it's like, it is clearly, this is what people want to come to see. They care about Chucky. He is the now the name of the franchise. And Bride of Chucky decides to take this in a pretty, I think, surprising direction, but because this is a franchise based around a killer doll, and a killer doll character that became a pop culture icon of sorts, it wasn't too difficult to transition Chucky into being more directly comedic while still balancing it with tried and true horror trappings.
Right. And the unfortunate comedy of Chucky is that he didn't start off as a killer doll. He started off as a guy played by Brad Dourif in the original film, and then when he was shot, fatally wounded in a shootout in the first act of the original Child's Play, he performed a voodoo curse and found himself in the body of a nearby good guy toy. And then he, went on a murderous rampage as a toy. Bride of Chucky finds us building out of a natural extrapolation of that. It's like, well, if he was a guy, then he probably knew other people. And it turns out he knew a character played by Jennifer Tilly, who is really the protagonist of the film. She's top billed. Her name's Tiffany in the film. And she was one of Charles Lee Ray's paramours, one of his girlfriends. And she's been carrying a torch for Chucky for the last, she says 10 years. So I take it that this is 10 years after the events of Child's Play 3.
I don't know.
Maybe. It's not sure. The timeline is a little convoluted.
Well, I think it's more directly when he was still a man. So I think, Child's Play, the original one, coming out in 1988. This comes out 1998?
It is 1998.
So yeah, the 10 years, like she was, a girlfriend of his probably just before he was murdered.
Okay, and that's right. Child's Play 3 came out in 91, but it actually took place a few years into the future because the protagonist, Andy, had been aged up into teenhood.
Well, let's not dwell on horror franchise timelines because that'll break your brain.
Yeah, we're not here for that.
And what's more important is that Tiffany is exactly the kind of addition you want to make to a franchise at this point. Like, is it somewhat retconning? Yes, but her addition doesn't change anything really about the previous movies. And Tiffany is a really fun and interesting character.
Oh, she's incredible. Like, she's a really, really fun lead for the film. I do believe, it's not necessarily her addition that changes the things about the previous film, but one of the things that Bride of Chucky thinks about that the other sequels didn't necessarily put a whole lot of emphasis on is that there's more magic to be had in the world. Like Child's Play, the original film introduces a world where magic is real, but it's only really used for one thing, and that's putting yourself in the body of a doll. And the silliness of the series not really taking that any further because, they didn't want it to be a movie about people casting spells at one another, is that Tiffany, in order to figure out how to resurrect Chucky from his mangled remains from the end of Child's Play 3, is she picks up a copy of Voodoo for Dummies.
Which is great. I love that kind of sense of humor about the world and the movie where it's not poking fun at itself harshly. It's really saying, like, at this point, why not just have somebody pick up a copy of Voodoo for Dummies to bring him back this time? Because we'll buy it, and it's really fun. And I think Bride of Chucky's got so many great decisions. And one of the greatest decisions is to hire Ronnie Yu as the director, who would go on to direct one of the biggest, most anticipated horror films of all time, Freddy vs. Jason. And my goodness, this is such a fantastic showcase for Ronnie Yu as a director.
Sure, I don't disagree. I think the movie is incredibly well directed. However, what was the movie that Ronnie Yu directed right before Bride of Chucky?
Is that Bride with the White Hair?
No, that would be Warriors of Virtue, previously reviewed on this very podcast, back when this podcast was called the Drew Reviews Podcast.
Yes.
So what's Warriors of Virtue in just a few words?
Warriors of Virtue is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Power Rangers ripoff with giant humanoid kangaroo people and lots of magic and kung fu and an unfortunate amount of a particular visual gimmick that Ronnie Yu likes to use, which is dropping the frame rate and blurring everything.
It's shutter speed, slow shutter speed.
Right. And thank goodness he does not bring that over into Bride of Chucky.
He does not bring that over into Bride of Chucky. I think he does a little bit of it in Freddy vs. Jason, but it's kind of like a more tasteful use of it.
It's used for like flashbacks.
Yeah, Bride of Chucky looks like a gazillion bucks. This movie looks so good.
It's crazy.
And it uses his cinematographer, Peter Powell, who does incredible work.
Oh, absolutely. And the reported budget on this movie is $25 million. You could have told me it was like triple that, and I'd believe you. This movie is ridiculously polished.
Oh, it looks incredible. And one of the things that I think adds the most value to it is knowing that the two leads in the movie that, you know, for the majority of the running time were going to be effects. Not digital effects, but special effects. Things practically on screen that had to move and perform.
Right. And of course, Kevin Yeager is still continuing to do the animatronic effects as he did from the first movie.
He is the master of puppets. Ooh-ah.
Ooh-ah. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. And you're absolutely right. They understand that they have to transcend effects. They have to be characters. They have to be performers. And they absolutely are. The animatronic and the puppet effects and everything are phenomenal. But what adds to that is Ronnie Yu gets how to frame these characters as icons.
Absolutely. He knows they're movie stars. He knows they're icons. He shoots them as such, and they never look just like dinky effects. I mean, they are really lovingly photographed in this film, really lovingly lit. This is a hyper-saturated, great-looking movie. We don't really see horror that looks much like this. It's a style that has simply sort of passed out of favor, not for any reason other than that just trends come and go. But my God, this movie looks incredible.
It's fantastic. There's so many, like you could pick almost any shot out of this movie that's focusing on Chucky and or Tiffany. And it's flawless. There's so many good uses of like split diopters.
Oh, it's almost De Palma-esque in its use of split diopter. Like none of the split diopter stuff is just showy. It's all motivated.
And it does, like you're saying, it doesn't call attention to itself as a split diopter shot. Like there's a shot after Chucky has murdered someone in a van and he's holding a knife up to his face. And it's this extreme close-up of him and Tiffany's in the background. And you're just like, this image right here tells me everything about these characters with no words.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a kind of movie we would get today. We say this all the time on GenreVision, but this is a dead kind of movie where the lead character is played by a puppet and it's a movie for adults. What was the last movie where some of the leads were puppets and the movie was for adults? It was that Happy Time Murders, right?
Yeah, and that's being kind to the definition of adults.
Uh-huh.
So, no, absolutely. I mean, technically, I really have little to no issues with this movie. It's kind of gorgeous.
Even the soundtrack for a 90s horror movie that is like primarily like nu metal, soundtrack's not so bad. The opening credits to the film are to Living Dead Girl, which is one of the best zombie tunes.
That is true. Got to give it to him.
And the movie uses it to really good effect. Like plenty of 90s horror movies and early 2000s horror movies had bad nu metal opening credit songs. Like we talked about I Know What You Did Last Summer and that stupid cover of Summer Breeze.
Oh, God, yeah.
Like there's one off song in this whole movie.
And it's a cover. It's another cover.
And it's a cover of Willie Nelson's Crazy that was originally made famous by Patsy Cline. Don Mancini probably wanted to use the Patsy Cline version for the movie because that's what makes the most sense. And it makes sense like for Tiffany as sort of this like trailer trash caricature to, you know, to have that Patsy Cline tune, but instead they use a nu metal cover of it. And it's kind of unfortunate.
Well, I think we do need to talk about the cast a little bit here because we get a wonderful appearance by the late, great John Ritter as maybe one of the best assholes in horror franchise cinema. He is the chief of police. He even gets a little Chief Brody line pull, which I like. And he is the uncle to one of our characters, Jade, played by Katherine Heigl. And Jade and Jesse,
who is her boyfriend that John Ritter doesn't like.
Yes, and Jesse is played by Nick Stabile?
Stabile?
Stabile? I don't know. Jade and Jesse are kind of star-crossed lovers, and they're, I think, like, just like seniors in high school, like when they're introduced, they're about to go to prom, all this stuff, and they want to run away, but Jade's uncle, John Ritter's character, Chief Warren Kincaid, he's, always on their tail, always flagging them, and they're planning to run away together. Well, eventually, Chucky and Tiffany, who I don't think we've said, eventually Tiffany gets murdered by Chucky and put into another doll. They are going to hitch a ride with Jade and Jesse and kind of pretty much groom them to be their new vessels that they're going to transport their souls into.
Sure, but it's not an immediate sort of pairing up road movie. There is some really good tension and conflict between Chucky and Tiffany. It turns out Chucky didn't really return Tiffany's affections in the way that she wanted. Mm-hmm. Tiffany was under the impression that when Chucky died, or when his soul was transferred into the doll 10 years prior, that he was planning on proposing. And that's not true. So she's really upset by this and locks Chucky away. He manages to get out, kills her in one of my favorite sequences in the movie where he electrocutes her in the bathtub. And there's this incredible shot of Chucky laughing as she's being electrocuted and these bubbles falling around him.
Oh, that shot is beautiful.
Well, it's not just like a funny shot. It's a funny shot, certainly, but it's a shot that really tells us about the character. Like it really is kind of an arty shot.
This is a movie where you can pull these shots out with no context and show it to somebody, be like, I get exactly what the emotion of this moment is for that character and what it's trying to tell me.
Right.
About, like, yeah, this is a guy who's loves what he does and revels in it.
By like half an hour into the movie, Jennifer Tilly no longer appears on screen anymore. She's a special effect from that point. She's a doll.
Yes, and her performance transfers perfectly from being a human to being a doll. I mean, obviously, she has a very distinct voice, but her performance is just so good.
She's a great voice actress. In addition to being just a great performer, she really is good on the vocal work in the film. John Ritter's character gets an incredible death.
Well, there's some commentary, which I do think we should touch on, in which, they have to kill this chief character. It's like, if he stops us, we're not going to, they're trying to get to Chucky's grave to get this amulet, this medallion, the medallions.
A holdover from Ronnie Yu's last movie.
Just, he loves medallions. And that will help them transfer their souls into new bodies. And they're like, if this chief person stops us, we're not going to get there. So we have to kill him. And Chucky, of course, just grabs a knife and is like, yeah, I'm going to go stab him. And Tiffany calls him out on it. It's like, stabbings went out with Bundy and Dahmer. It's a funny, grotesque little line, but you got a good pull from it where it's like, this is talking about the evolution of horror cinema.
This is ultimately what Bride of Chucky is about. It's about how franchises have to evolve to stay ahead. It is about survival of the fittest and about changing to maintain. Because at this point, Friday was pretty much dead. Elm Street was dead.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for Chucky to continue on, it couldn't be Child's Play anymore. It had to evolve into something different. And so it became sort of, a road movie, almost sort of True Romance kind of thing, or a Natural Born Killers kind of story.
Which they directly reference in the movie.
Yeah.
Of course, this kill that they have involves like setting up nails on a dashboard that they open up that then fling into John Ritter's face.
Because the airbag goes off and project, a bunch of nails become shrapnel. And
it's fantastic.
It's an incredible effect because it's like something at a Final Destination. But they don't just have the nails stick into his face. They do something incredible with this makeup where the nails actually sort of land in his gums and they pull his lips back and all these sort of odd angles. It's an incredible effect. Like the conception of it is just awesome.
And then what's great, I like Don Mancini's kind of clever touch because he has, the shot lingers on John Ritter's face. And then Chucky says, there's something about this that reminds me of something. I can't put my finger on it. Like, he doesn't directly say, oh, Pinhead. Like, it's a little kind of cookie to throw to the, horror audience.
Yeah. Now there's plenty of direct acknowledgement too. Like the opening, the prologue of the film, they go into a police evidence repository and you see the Leatherface chainsaw. You see the Jason hockey mask.
Yeah. Freddy's glove. Michael Myers' mask.
Yep.
It's a fun nod, but I like later when it turns out John Ritter isn't dead and he pops up out of the little cubby hole that they've stored him in the van. Chucky stabs him and he says, what did I tell you? A true classic never goes out of style. And you're like, man, you're getting it. Like, this is fun and it's on the nose, but your presentation is so on point that I'm on board with everything that you're saying and doing.
Yeah, I was concerned about Bride of Chucky because I liked Child's Play 1 and 2. The third one I saw just in preparation for this to get a little bit of context, like to find out, if anything of any degree of importance happened in Child's Play 3. The answer is not really. At the end of Child's Play 2, he's kind of melted, and basically Child's Play 3 does away with him again and kind of shreds him. And in the beginning of Bride of Chucky, Jennifer Tilly's character, Tiffany, is putting back the pieces of Chucky and, basically trying to bring it back to life again. And lo and behold, because she has Voodoo for Dummies, it works. But it really does act as a reboot of the series. All the exposition that you need is in the opening credits sequence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very welcoming to new viewers, and it had to act that way.
When it did. It did well at the box office.
It did very well. And it does that, again, by being willing to take the piss out of itself from time to time, but still saying, like, hey, we like these kind of movies, and we know you like these kind of movies, and we want to deliver on those promises while also putting our tongues in our cheeks. And Bride of Chucky does that so well while still being surprisingly earnest in regards to the romance between Chucky and Tiffany. Like, there's a moment where Jade and Jesse stop off at a seedy motel and they're in the honeymoon suite, and there's this other couple there. They rob Jade and Jesse, and Tiffany sees this, so she goes and kills them. And the kill here, where she launches a champagne bottle into the mirror above their bed, and the shards come and puncture the water bed, and there's just these giant sprays of blood. And Ronnie, they cut to Chucky's face just in total awe. And right after that's all done, he just looks at Tiffany and goes, I love you. It's great.
Really, the movie is a very pointed commentary about the evolution of horror. And I think it's Don Mancini very openly saying, if franchises like this are to continue, they can't just keep doing the same old tricks. Not only do they have to become more inventive, but they have to change at a fundamental level. They have to acknowledge that there is a hero to these stories, and we've determined that it's the killer.
Or in this case, killers.
So they have to come up with a way, they have to come up with stories to support that idea of the slasher villain as hero. And Bride of Chucky does that while being very funny, very stylish. The humans, in sort of a traditional slasher way, aren't all that interesting, but they're not traditional fodder in the way that they are in, say, 80s slasher films. They're used a little bit differently here. The way that Katherine Heigl's character and her boyfriend Jesse are sort of used as a Bonnie and Clyde metaphor. These two decide to elope, and people start to expect that they're the murderers because Chucky and Tiffany are riding along in the same van. It's clever, it's fun. And, these two unsuspecting dimwits.
Well, this is where I directly mean that farce is a part of this script, because this is not a door slamming farce, but it's the idea of that both of them start to suspect that the other one is the killer doing all these killings.
Right.
That's farce. That is textbook farce. And it's a great idea, but the problem is that Jade and Jesse, they're just not that interesting.
They're not, but they're not the leads in the movie either. And the movie knows it.
Exactly.
The movie is structured on Chucky and Tiffany as leads. And the final act where Katherine Heigl and her boyfriend, they figure out a way to use Chucky and Tiffany against one another because they figure out that their relationship is unstable. And so they get them to start fighting, and the camper that they're in, flips and stuff like that. And they managed to throw Tiffany into the fucking oven.
Which is great.
That image of the scorched Tiffany pounding against the inside of the oven door is like an incredible image. Again, Ronnie Yu knows how to shoot these characters to make them look like icons and actually to draw real horror out of them. Like, that's one thing the series hasn't lost, is that dolls are freaky. And for the most part, it's not really using that for scary horror. But in the right moments, it's like, yeah, okay, we still know what we're doing here.
Well, and before we start to shift gears, we've said it, but I really want to emphasize Bride of Chucky is so funny.
It's really well written. I didn't expect to enjoy it, on a comedic level as much as I did, but I'm really surprised with it. I think it's just not a favorite franchise of mine. Like, that's the only real knock I have against it, is that, it just doesn't float my boat like other franchises. But there's tons here to like. Alexis Arquette has a great role in it. Oh, yeah. I mean, a great kill. Again, another bit of great humor is that Chucky suffocates him by putting a pillow on his face and sitting on him. And while he's struggling, him and Tiffany are having this kind of reconnecting conversation. It's great. It's super dark and gallows humor. But again, it's the music. I think this is by Graham Revell. Yeah, Graham Revell. Yeah, Graham Revell. The music is great in this. It's this wonderful kind of like somber, bassy 50s riff as he's suffocating Alexis Arquette, and they're kind of playing catch up. And he's like, "Tiff, you look great. I thought you were going to let yourself go, but you look fantastic." Like, it's wonderful. And Brad Dourif, there's a reason why he has stuck with the character. I think he's only made the character better over the years. I agree. And I thought, once I kind of figured out what the structure of the film was, and that it was going to be sort of a road movie, but also a movie, kind of a Bonnie and Clyde about two twisted people that are in a really fraught romantic relationship, but also they kill people, and there's this amoral aspect to it. I thought, oh, this is going to be kind of a Devil's Rejects type movie. I hate the Devil's Rejects. I nearly walked out of it when I saw it in the movie theater, and I've rewatched it since, and I still don't like it. This, however, takes that same format and that same idea and makes it incredibly enjoyable to watch. Like, the mastery it has over its farcical elements really makes it quite a good film. 100% agree. And, I was definitely hesitant because I've seen this movie a bunch. I really like this movie. And I was kind of hesitant when we put it on the schedule for you. But I'm very stoked that you've walked away with that reaction to it. And we'll get back to it in a second, but let's talk about our other entry for this week's Versus. Another movie I've been kind of wanting to get you to watch for a long time and finally found a way to get it in. This is Pin from 1988. It's adapted from a novel, what we would know as a paperback from hell, thanks to Grady Hendrix's fantastic book. This is actually how I first heard of Pin. I actually didn't know they had adapted it into a film until I heard of the novel first. And then I thought, oh, okay, great. And then I found out that Terry O'Quinn was in it. And I was like, all right, now I got to see it because I like Terry O'Quinn. But Pin is it a killer doll movie? Yes and no, I guess. It's not a killer toy movie, but it preys on our same fears of inanimate human-shaped objects. Right. I mean, this isn't a direct correlation, but when we talk about something like the uncanny valley, sure, like that thing of something that has the appearance of being human, but we know it's not. Right. It's the same kind of, fear we get of mannequins or, wax sculptures or something like that. Statues. Exactly. Yes. Simulations of humanity that we know are inherently inhuman. Right. And Chucky does inherently qualify that because he looks like a child. He looks like a toddler. And he's really about that size. Yes. Whereas Pin is a full-grown, anatomically correct mannequin with this kind of see-through translucent skin, so you can see all the musculature and everything inside of him. And he is basically a prop for this doctor character played by Terry O'Quinn. And he uses it mostly, in the film, we see that he uses it with children that he treats. And what he does is he throws his voice and talks like Pin to kind of put them at ease. But he also does this with his children. And his children, when they're very young, believe that Pin is real. Sure. Let's back up a bit. Pin is written and directed by a guy named Sandy Stern. It's very Canadian. Like if you recognize the lead is David Hewlett, who you might recognize from Cube and several other things.
Well,
he was also in The Shape of Water.
I was going to say my my pull for this being really Canadian is David Hewlett plays the character of Leon, the doctor's son, as a older high schooler. But when we first see Leon, he's 7 years old, and he's played by an actor that I knew as one of the original members of the Midnight Society from Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Oh man, no wonder that kid looks so familiar.
Yeah, and I guess he's a regular actor on that show Letterkenny.
Jacob Tierney.
Yeah,
go figure.
So that's, I'm like, Canadian. I know this is Canadian, but yes, and Sandy Stern. Almost all of his career worked in television, doing television movies. Pin is his only movie that was released theatrically in Canada, but went direct to video in the United States. And fun fact, released the same year and month in Canada as the original Child's Play.
Yes. The thing that Sandy Stern is probably most known for, however, is being the screenwriter who adapted Jay Anson's The Amityville Horror for the big screen. So he has the screenwriting credit for doing the adaptation on Amityville Horror. That also gives him a credit on the 2005 remake of Amityville Horror. But yeah, that is his big claim to fame. So the film actually opens up as a present day scene where we see a bunch of suburban children going to a big house and seeing what looks like a mannequin in the window. And they try to sneak up in the mannequin, and they're talking basically like haunted house legends, like, oh, I hear it's so-and-so, I hear it's this, I hear it's that.
Which I just want to note, I love this stock scene.
Oh, it's absolutely a stock scene, but it serves to establish a certain mood and a certain tone for the film that makes you think, oh, okay, I understand what type of film it's going to be. And then the first act of the film serves to completely subvert that. 15 years before those kids gather in front of the house and look in the window and see this mannequin thing, these two little blonde children named Ursula and Leon live this very structured existence under the rule of their parents, played by, like we said, Terry O'Quinn, who is a doctor named Frank, and their mom, who is seemingly just obsessed with keeping things clean and orderly. You know, they have very iron-fisted ways of parenting their children.
Well, and can I say, I really like this introduction because it tells us everything we need to know about these characters without any dialogue. We see Leon and Ursula are eating at this table, and the camera pans down, and they're standing on these stools. They step off the stools when they're done eating. We see both of their names printed on the stools. They carry the stools away, and as soon as the stools get carried away, a vacuum comes into frame and vacuums up right where they were, and it pans up and shows their mother. So you understand exactly the kind of regimented lives that they have.
I'll agree that this is good visual storytelling. Like, it tells you a whole lot of things that you need to know about what their life is like. But I disagree in that it doesn't tell you everything you need to know. The interactions between these kids, and we'll get to this a little bit later, kind of all focus around one central dynamic. And it feels like there's one scene that's kind of missing early on in this first act of the movie that kind of defines who these kids are. Like, do they have any sort of normal interaction with one another? We never really get to see that. Is there an establishment of their dynamic? It doesn't really ever happen. I just feel like there's a significant puzzle piece missing.
We'll find out a little later, but this scene then transitions into them going into their father's study. And it's clear that this is kind of a nightly ritual where he quizzes them on some kind of piece of knowledge that they have to do before they can go to bed. And of Ursula, who is the younger of the two siblings, he just asks her, can you count to 10, which she does. But then of Leon, he's like, what will we do with the schoolboy? And immediately, Terry O'Quinn's performance, so fucking good. Like, you understand.
It's Terry O'Quinn.
Of course. And he's like, count backwards from 100 in sevens. And of course, Leon can't do it. And he's like, no, Leon, that's wrong. We'll work on it tomorrow. And you get, again, their regimented structure of their lives. And while I do agree, like you're saying, that we don't really see them interacting as siblings in kind of what we would deem normal ways, we find out pretty quickly these kids are not leading any kind of normal lives. And
sure, yeah, I agree. But there is there is a power dynamic between the two, and
Yes.
we don't, I think, get enough attention paid in the movie to how that power dynamic comes about.
Well, and unfortunately, and this is not spoiler warning, but I don't even know if we just have to put this up front. This is going to get icky.
The movie gets exceptionally icky. Maybe not in the ways you think if you're just hearing this for the first time, but the movie goes some very weird and extraordinarily uncomfortable places. And as a horror film, which it definitely is, this is the source of the majority of the horror. So Frank, played by Terry O'Quinn, the doctor, takes his kids, Ursula and Leon, into the doctor's office, where it is very clear that when Pin and Terry O'Quinn are in the same room, Pin can talk. His lips don't move, but this watery little voice comes out of him. And the voice actually is Jonathan Banks, who was uncredited in the role. You'll know Jonathan Banks as Mike from Breaking Bad.
Mm-hmm. It's very clear after a certain point, pretty young, I think, because we see Leon and Ursula when they're about 7 and 5, and then we have another age gap where they're about 12 and 10, and then what they are for the majority of the movie, which is pretty much like high school, in their older high school years.
Yeah.
Early on, it's very clear that Leon very directly believes Pin is real. It's not his father throwing his voice. But as we learn what the dynamic between Leon and Ursula becomes, we also find out that Ursula realizes that, okay, Pin is not real. It is our father doing Pin's voice. But Leon doesn't buy any of that. For him, Pin is real.
Yeah, Leon believes that Pin is this fully functioning being, and this may be influenced by this really formative traumatic experience that pushes the bounds of believability. When he is sort of pre-teenaged, Leon finds himself unable to interact normally with other boys. So in search of that sort of male companionship, he turns to Pin. And when he's at his dad's doctor's office one day talking to Pin, a nurse comes in the room and he hides. This nurse, who we never see again, fucks the dummy. What?
Well, okay, here's the thing. This is just dipping our toe into the pool of ickiness that is Pin. But this scene is clearly suggesting a strong sense of some kind of sexual trauma. During these formative years, when you are discovering what sex is and these feelings and everything, Leon and Ursula are having very different approaches to it. I think there's somewhat missing in the movie the idea that sex is not this super taboo thing in their family because of their dad being a doctor. Like, what happens is that Ursula at one point is looking at basically a nudie mag and gets caught by their mother. And when this happens, their father takes them to the office in front of Pin, and Pin, their father, explains to them what sex is very mechanically and medically. And it's in this scene that Ursula looks back and sees that it's their father throwing his voice.
Sure, but they also explain something in the film that is extraordinarily uncomfortable and often something that is not communicated to children. And not only are the mechanics of sex explained, like the normal biological functions of body parts and things like that get explained in the usual, like a good sexual education course in school, for instance, like anatomy being explained well. What he explains that I think a lot of this skips over is that, the movie puts it like this: just as people have a thirst for water, they have a thirst for sex. And Pin, Terry O'Quinn's character at this point, does explain that this comes from a biological imperative, that this comes from Mother Nature. Because we have to procreate, this drives a thirst for sex.
Well, and they give it a specific name. They call it the need.
Ugh, I hate the way you said that.
Well, it's a creepy, and that's what it is. It's like, I think there's a really interesting exploration here about the approach of being so open with your kids that you're kind of missing the forest for the trees.
Well, I mean, Pin is a way for Terry O'Quinn's character to be able to explain things to them indirectly. And so he takes sort of some of the responsibility off of himself. You know, they can look to Pin as a resource for information that is sort of unbiased. And, you know, they can feel that they can talk to Pin. And because Leon feels he can talk to Pin without his father present, this opens up a whole other can of worms. But this is like the first super uncomfortable, like nutty scene where the father is explaining all this stuff to these kids using Pin as an educational tool. And Pin says, "Leon, take the towel off my lap. Do it." It's, oh, God, kill me, murder me. This is so terrible.
In this moment, Leon doesn't do it. And Ursula's like, "I'll do it. I don't care." And she takes it off and she starts laughing, which to me is like that's a pretty natural response.
I don't know. Maybe. I have no clue. It's so weird and so icky.
Well, this is the thing. This is getting into subject matter that is universally uncomfortable.
Well, they're already setting up that this young girl has a curiosity in sex and a comfort with this subject matter that seems strangely precocious and makes me feel horrible inside.
Well, we're getting to it.
They clearly establish a few years later, like after they get to the teen years for Leon and Ursula, they pretty clearly establish that Leon has fears that Ursula is considered the local slut.
Which we don't know. Like there's no confirmation as of yet that she is like sleeping around with a bunch of people, but that is the perception. And Leon has an incredibly controlling feeling about Ursula. And we're going to get to some more elements of that, but
first we got to visit Back to the Future.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you thought Back to the Future was icky, this, well, it ends up that Ursula has been sleeping with at least one boy, and she has gotten pregnant. And she only tells Leon, and she's like, I don't know, like, should I tell father? And Leon, even now, when he's, I would say, what, you 16 to 18?
He's really just about to graduate.
Right. So you know, probably around 18. And Leon's first instinct is, let's ask Pin what we should do. And already Ursula is kind of like, you know, she doesn't say this outright, but we get from her performance that, okay, she knows Pin isn't real, but she does this to kind of placate Leon because she cares about him. They go and see Pin, and of course, Pin doesn't say anything at first.
But this is the crucial scene where we see Pin recommending that Ursula get an abortion, but then Ursula looks at Leon's lips when Pin is talking. And of course, Leon's lips are moving very subtly. So we know he's sort of, you know, throwing his voice, you know, ventriloquism style. Pin's advice is that they should go to their father, Frank, and ask him to perform the abortion. This happens. And again, like I talked about, the sexual dynamic between these family members, and not to say that there's an incestuous dynamic.
We'll get there.
But the talk about sex between these family members is the primary source of horror for this film, which means that this is disgust horror. This is horror that makes us feel disgusted, and not in a way that we feel disgust when we look at blood and guts. This is a different sort of disgust.
Yeah, an internal one.
Terry O'Quinn, rather, right as he's about to perform the abortion, he says, "Are you frightened?" And she says, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Good."
I mean, before that, I mean, that's already horrible. But before that, because Leon goes to the office, and I love that Terry O'Quinn, again, he's talking to Pin. He's like, you know, Pin, after all the things I taught them, here I am in the office on a Sunday. Like that, like that's the most horrible. So it's so interesting because you get this very cold, you know, feeling from their father, and that the only way he's ever been able to kind of have any connection to them emotionally is through Pin and doing his voice. But in this moment, he says to Leon, "Aren't you going to observe? It might be educational." Which again, you just get, it's like this character is supremely fucked up and has transferred that into his kids.
You're right. I mean, on one level, the film is about trauma and dysfunction as inheritance. And these are things that Leon is inheriting from his father. And it actually talks about inheritance on the mother-daughter side too. Mm-hmm. The mother is incredibly focused on making sure things are clean and neat and tidy. And this doesn't really seem to be motivated by anything other than her own personal wants for tidiness.
And we see, you know, like I said, the vacuum shot, we see that there's all this plastic covering all over the furniture. We immediately understand. It's like, okay, this is who this woman is. It's one note, yes, but it defines her character well.
Well, and the plastic coverings on the furniture become an important metaphor later. Shortly after all this stuff happens, Frank catches Leon talking to Pin by himself late one night.
And Pin responding.
Right. And it freaks Frank the fuck out because he realizes like, oh shit, my son is talking to this thing as if it's real. This is not good. So he takes Pin in his car, and Ursula and Leon's parents then promptly die in a car wreck.
This moment, I don't know how to read it because Terry Quinn continues to look back at Pin, who's, you know, in the back seat, and eventually he's got this, you know, blanket over him, and eventually that falls off, and he keeps looking at Pin, and you're like, is this trying to play it? Does he possibly think Pin is alive?
Well, I mean, the movie at this point, in no uncertain terms, wants us to still be afraid that Pin has some sentience.
Well, because early on, there's a brief scene of the doctor, when Leon is a kid, talking to Pin when he's by himself, and they're
right
talking about something about a patient. And then when Frank realizes Leon sees him, he's like, Leon, I told you to go, which brought up a question. I was like, does the doctor talk to Pin when he's alone? And I can only say, this isn't in the movie, this is only supplemental from the book, is that it's pretty much said in the book that this is kind of the father's way of talking to himself. He's not talking to Pin as if he's real. This is just the way that he kind of debates with himself externally.
But it's also the way that he's found to open up a channel of discussion with his children.
Right.
You know, he's able to take some of the responsibility and awkwardness away from himself by having Pin be the one that delivers the unfortunate and uncomfortable truths about sex.
Whereas Leon's appraisal of Pin is different. Leon believes Pin is a real person, and it's clear that Pin has become a personality in Leon's head.
After Leon and Ursula's parents die in this car wreck, they start to be looked after by their aunt. Leon at this point is old enough to basically be Ursula's legal guardian, but their aunt comes over a couple times, and Leon, of course, does not like this because Leon is really enjoying this newfound freedom now that he's gotten out from under the thumbs of his parents. And is able to rip the plastic off the furniture. The aunt comes over and is basically still this remainder of a prior ruling regime in Leon's life.
And one of the most important things Leon wants to do is he wants Pin to start living in the house.
Red flag.
To say the least. And of course, Dorothy is very much...
Dorothy?
What's that? Dorothy.
The Aunt Dorothy.
Yes, Aunt
Dorothy.
Dorothy, where are you? Aunt Dorothy doesn't know that Pin is in the house, and Leon has taken to start putting his father's old clothes on him. That also freaks Ursula out. She's seeing more and more that Leon is kind of falling into this spiral with Pin, but she continues to placate him. Leon says very ominously to Ursula, I don't think Aunt Dorothy's going to be staying with us very long, which leads to one of the creepiest scenes I think I've ever seen. And it's so simple.
It's incredibly simple, but it's also very scary. Like I couldn't tell whether or not this movie was actually going to try for classic types of horror where people are alone in dark rooms and something is coming to get them. I thought like, oh, the movie is going to derive most of its horror from this icky sexual dynamic. But the movie actually knows how to really scare you in a sort of traditional horror way. Dorothy is in bed one night, and of course she hears that watery Pin voice, you know, that Jonathan Banks says, Dorothy, Dorothy, I'm right behind you. It's like, oh God, this is so freaky. The lighting is so good in the dark room, and you just know that this fucking dummy is in there.
And all we see in this shot is just a close-up of her laying on her side facing the camera and just hearing Pin's voice with this slight effect and Banks's performance saying like, I'm right behind you. And it's like, fuck off.
It really is very scary. And this isn't even at the halfway point of the movie. So the second half of the movie, I think, takes a dump in pacing. Like, this is my huge criticism of the movie, is that the second half of the film, after they get Aunt Dorothy out of the way and Penn is now dressed up like a man, instead of having his translucent skin, now has like a makeup flesh colored exterior and has a wig on. It's wearing their father's clothes. This is when Ursula's, she wants to kind of strive for a normal life. So she gets this boyfriend. Of course, Leon, in his very controlling ways, wants to control Ursula's sexual agency because he's an awful, terrible creep who is also extraordinarily ill. He kills the boyfriend.
Eventually, yes, Ursula, she gets a job at a library, so she's not in the house as much. She's away from Leon.
She wants some agency.
Exactly.
Which is perfectly normal.
And she meets this guy, and they strike up a friendship, and they start dating. And of course, Leon now Penn is taking on more of Leon's his angers, and kind of egging Leon on. Penn's character changes, which I think is great. Like, I think it's great that it's very clear what Penn is starting to represent for Leon. And Leon at some point says, you know what I want to do? I want to be a writer. I'm going to write poetry. I want to write an epic poem, like Beowulf. Eventually, Ursula's like, I am going to bring... She continually is like making excuses that the boyfriend won't come to their house. But eventually, Leon makes it so that he gets there and introduces him to Penn. And you can tell that Leon's kind of edging him to freak him out, to hopefully scare him away. But the boyfriend takes it all in stride. Then Leon actually starts for a moment to like the boyfriend.
Yeah, he actually seems to think that the boyfriend can tolerate, their particular brand of weirdness and how they like to do things.
And it's because Leon reads his poetry to him. And this is the moment where, if it hasn't become clear, it becomes real clear.
Oh, yeah. Well, this epic poem, quote unquote, is written from the perspective of a rapist. It is so deeply disgusting and disturbing. Like I said, this is the primary source of the film's horror, is it just wants to make you feel so grossed out by these thoughts, these thoughts that awful people have.
Well, it's not just that awful people. It's this perversity that has been left unchecked because of this kind of way too liberal approach to sexuality that these kids have grown up with.
I don't know if it's necessarily a liberal approach, but it's this particular approach. And it's a thematically complicated movie. Like, it's not exactly clear what it's trying to say. Other than that, we pass things on to our kids in a way that they will inherit traumas, in a way that they will inherit odd behaviors, and that we have to be careful how we raise our children. Like, ultimately, it's a moral tale about that, I believe. But also, there's the fact that Ursula considers that, or actually Ursula believes very, very strongly that Leon has paranoid schizophrenia. That he has delusions about, hallucinations and things like that, the schizophrenics may have. Maybe this is true, and maybe it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of mental illness left untreated.
Or placated.
Sure, but it's also ultimately a sensationalist horror story. And in some ways it is exploitative.
Oh, it's definitely that.
So it is just like openly, knowingly icky. And it's not going to be for most people. In fact, I think there are probably quite a few people, like, after hearing just the synopsis of the first act, are going to go, okay, not for me, not going there.
This is a movie where I'm like, yes, this is exploring the really disturbing, traumatic elements of incest. Whereas we just had a show that was the most watched show in the world that was pretty cavalier about incestuous relationships. Of course, I'm talking about Game of Thrones.
Yes, it is comparatively rather cavalier, but it also doesn't forget that it ultimately has to derive some horror from the fact that this character, Penn, and he is certainly a character in the film, is coming from that same fear of inanimate human-shaped objects. There's this scene in, almost the third act of the film where Leon invites this woman over to the house named Marcia. And of course, he's chasing her around the house with the fucking doll going, hello, Marcia. Marcia. And that scene is pretty much just as scary as the Aunt Dorothy death.
Well, because he's put Penn up in this like electronic wheelchair. So now he can wheel him around. And again, I as low budget and kind of TV movie as this might be, lighting's pretty good during these scenes.
Lighting's good. The score is not so good. The score, like you said, is like stereotypical Canadian TV movie cheese.
Well, I didn't say cheese.
Good.
You said cheese. I said it's specifically that cheap, low budget Canadian TV synth stuff. And I like the theme. Like, there is a music box theme, which is tied diegetically into the movie by a music box that Ursula gets as a gift from Pin.
Sure, the theme is good. Can't argue that. But the rest of the stuff is like pretty cornball.
I don't disagree, but it's by no means a deal breaker for me. But I'm also just kind of more conditioned to that stuff.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm not saying that the score is great. Like I say, it's not a deal breaker.
Yeah. The deal breaker, if there is one in the film, is this third act, which I think kind of takes away the pacing that has been working so well throughout the rest of the film.
Well, it also turns into a different movie.
It does, and I feel like the climax is pretty unsatisfying. Like, the way in which they kind of bring the conflict to a head doesn't really go in any interesting places. The resolution is pretty interesting. Like, the final shot of the film, and I don't know if you want to spoil it here, is a pretty effective final shot. Like, it resonated deeply with me. But the climax is
Well, I talking about your plastic furniture coverings as metaphor. Leon believes he kills the boyfriend, and Penn is, of course, saying, like, you need to clean this up and hide the body. I love when Leon has to keep lying to Ursula to tell her why the boyfriend's missing, and at some point Penn calls him out, and he's like, you can't lie, or something. He says something like, I can't remember the exact line, but he calls him out on being a bad liar. But Leon uses the plastic furniture coverings as a body bag to put the boyfriend in, which that's so good.
It is good, and it's great use of symbols and metaphors and all that. Like, it's all it's got to come from well-written material, which, look to the novel.
But like you're saying, this third act then turns into kind of it's stretching a lot of shoe leather.
I would agree.
And because we know it's like, okay, Ursula is going to find out that the boyfriend has been supposedly killed. And it's just, she's got to find, he's got an alarm on his watch that's set up. And she eventually hears that and then realizes, like, oh no, he's dead. And I won't spoil where the movie goes for anybody who sees it, because I do think that the actual final shot and the conclusion is pretty great. But I can't disagree with your criticism. I definitely like kind of the first two acts of Pin more, but it still fits in, I think, with the kind of tawdry tale that this is, especially considering its origins.
Certainly, it's definitely pulpy, but it has more on its mind than your typical sort of pulp, creepy sex story. Like, it does have some sort of, I guess, intellectual aspirations. It's not just sort of a pure exploitation story that exists, with scumbag characters and, white trash weirdos. Like, it's really about wealth in a lot of ways. So it kind of stays out of that zone and talks more about, like, how twisted suburbia can be and all these sorts of things. Like, it has some loftier aspirations than your typical, exploitation trash novel.
Oh yeah. I mean, Janet Maslin, who was writing for the New York Times, said it's a cool, bloodless, well-made thriller with a taste for the quietly bizarre. And I think that's a pretty good read of it. I think, as we've laid out here, it's going to be a difficult watch for some people, considering the subject matter.
Yeah. Janet Maslin's pull quote is extraordinarily eloquent and certainly sums up the film. If I were to have a pull quote for the film, it would be something like ick or yuck or ew.
But like you're saying, I don't think that's necessarily negative, because that is clearly what the movie is trying to achieve.
Oh, no, it has a lot on its mind. It has a lot on its mind, and I think it achieves most of it very, very well. It is deceptively well directed.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Well, let's throw these in the Thunderdome. I mean, this is a versus episode, and for a killer doll movie, where do you land on the Bride of Chucky versus Pin?
Well, if you just want to look at it as killer doll movies, Bride of Chucky is the one that I would probably watch again tomorrow. If I had to pick one to watch again tomorrow, it's Bride of Chucky. It's a movie that I can sort of like put on in the background and listen to like an album. It's a blast. Pin, however, is the one I would probably say has more value, but to a select number of people, like a much smaller audience, I think would find this like as a greater curiosity.
To me, this is kind of a perfect approach to a double feature. Because with a double feature, kind of the rule of thumb is you want the crowd pleaser first. You want that to get everybody excited, and you usually want that to be the more notable movie, the one that people are going to come for the marquee value. And then the second programmer is the deeper cut. It's usually moodier. It's usually kind of a more difficult movie. And I think these make actually a pretty kind of wackadoo double feature. But if I was going to have to pick one of them, it's really tough. I don't want to cop out and say a tie, because that's how I really feel. Obviously, they're such polar opposite movies.
Yeah, they're just so drastically different. But you know, I don't think they necessarily make a good pairing of watch Bride of Chucky and then watch Pin. Like it doesn't quite work like that. They're two, you know, similar ideas of like what happens when a doll or a dummy comes to life, but such drastically different approaches to the material and such really different dramatic, like core dramatic arguments to the movies.
And I agree with your read of like, yeah, if I wanted to watch one again, immediately it would be Bride of Chucky. It is just such a joy. Also, it's really short. Like, remember when movies could be under 90 minutes?
Oh yeah, this is what, 88 minutes for Bride of Chucky?
With credits.
Snap your fingers, that movie's done.
Yeah,
it is like a little appetizer.
I mean, you even sent it to me in your screen. You were like, this movie is so breezy. In a good way.
Oh yeah, no, it's enjoyable in a way that it feels light and fluffy, but not like an insubstantial thing or an unremarkable thing.
No, it's just it's economic.
It's 88 minutes of fun.
Yeah, it's economic. It's fun. I mean, Pin is the one obviously that I want people to watch. Like this movie doesn't even have a Blu-ray release.
No, Pin is by far the greater curiosity.
Yeah, it's the gem that I really hope. You know, I know people. It's pretty much like people who like this movie love this movie. And I kind of do. I really, really, really dig this movie. And I know it's difficult and icky, but I'll agree. I'll say I think Bride of Chucky is probably going to be the easier one. But if Pin sounds like something you think you can stomach, I highly recommend it. It's such a well-made movie.
I want to foster interest in Pin. Like, be interested in this movie because the actual attempts into more comfortable realms of horror, like there's a creepy dummy in the room with you and it has a scary voice, like those couple of scenes in the movie are so effective as to warrant a recommendation based on those things alone. But the other things the film broaches, I think, are handled so well, not in that it's handling them with kid gloves, but it's that it's handling them with a distinct intention to gross you out. If you're up for that experience, absolutely watch Pin.
Well, let's head to the shelf where we pick a movie to act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic or topics. And as always, we want to encourage you loyal listeners to go to GenreVision.com and comment on this episode's post with your own shelf picks. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf?
We already mentioned that Sander Stern, the writer and director of Pin, wrote the Amityville horror film. He adapted it from Jay Anson's novel. Amityville 2: The Possession is a prequel to that film.
Oh, boy.
And it also features an extraordinarily icky sexual dynamic between two siblings.
That movie is... I have a fondness for Amityville 2: The Possession, but I outright admit it is so trashy.
Oh, it's extraordinarily trashy. I may have said extraordinarily a lot in this episode, but trust me when I say Amityville 2 is trash-tacular compared to the first one. I actually don't like the original Amityville. I just think it's a pretty humdrum movie, not all that interesting. Amityville 2 takes the same location and takes some of the same ideas from the first film, tells a prequel, and makes it about 6 times crazier.
Oh, it's absolutely bug fuck.
And it's, I guess, in a lot of traditional ways, a quote-unquote worse movie. It's certainly not well reviewed. Like, it's definitely considered to be a really bad movie by most people. But I found it way more approachable, actually, or even enjoyable in an odd way as an exploitation film. Because the first film is not that. The first film is not really an exploitation film.
No.
Amityville 2, however, starts to tread that exploitation ground, and you're like, this is wacky and fucked up, and like,
it's so directly provocative.
for sure. And in ways that are way trashier and have no hint of intellectualism. It is just gross and weird. And there's some like fun creature effects in the movie too. I recommend it. I really do.
Wow, that's a kind of out of left field pull from you, and I love it.
I don't think you should see the one about the fucking clock. I don't think you should see the one about the dollhouse.
I like the clock one. It's directed by Tony Randall.
Oh, well, okay. Well, you know what?
It's also icky.
Okay. Amityville 2, The Possession wins. Anyway, what are you pulling off the shelf?
Well, our two movies this week, I would say Bride of Chucky and Pin. One is kind of an all-out celebration of genre tropes, and the other one, Pin, is attempting to be, I think, obviously not in the material, but in the approach, kind of a little classier, kind of a little more, I was going to say approachable, but of course that's wrong. You know, it's cleaner in terms of its direction and its manipulation of genre elements. So I wanted to find a movie that straddled the line between those two, and that also fit into our killer doll theme. And I think a pretty good representation of that is Dolls from 1987. This is
Charles Band movie?
Well, directed by Stuart Gordon.
Oh, okay.
Produced by Brian Yuzna and Charles Band. This is pre-Puppet Master.
Right.
You want to talk about breezy and short? Dolls is 77 minutes with an extended opening credit scene and closing credits.
Oh, okay. So a music video.
Yeah, basically. A glorified short film. The Charles Band special. And Dolls is a very direct, very clear kind of fairy tale. It's very heightened. It's by no means one of Stuart Gordon's best movies, but it's kind of one of his most fun. You have Guy Rolfe playing the eccentric doll maker. He would later go on to replace William Hickey as Andre Toulon in some of the Puppet Master sequels. And it's just a fun haunted house movie. And the house was completely all fabricated, you know, a complete set. It's a really good haunted house. It's a light, I don't want to say light because it does get, you know, certainly fairly violent, but it's fun. I think it's a killer doll movie that if this is the kind of stuff that you're already into, this is a good B-side kind of movie to check out. And I think it revels in its genre elements while still trying to do something a little bit classier with its fairy tale pulls and everything. If it's one you haven't seen, Dolls.
Well, okay. Is it time for Currently Consuming?
It is time for some Currently Consuming.
Num 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 num.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
Let's talk about that trailer for Dr. Sleep.
Okay. Yeah, Dr. Sleep. I think we should say first and foremost here, Dr. Sleep is originally a novel by Stephen King that is written as a sequel to his novel, The Shining. I have not read Dr. Sleep, and I'm assuming you have not, Travis?
I have not read it in full. I've read about half of it. And it's just like, you know, one of these things where you put a book down and you know that it's going to take you a while to finish it. And you're not necessarily disliking it, but you're just, you know, you put it down one day and you don't pick it back up again and you move on with your life and you think, one of these days I'll finish that. That's Dr. Sleep. I did the same with Joe Hill's Nosferatu. It's nothing against those books. It's just, I had to put them down one day for some reason and just haven't picked them back up. It's been years. So I don't know what it's like to actually read the full novel of Dr. Sleep, but we've actually featured some discussion about it on the show in our past episode all about The Shining. And from what I understand, it's not a book that's particularly well loved. However, it is significant in that it is the sequel to The Shining. Of course, this had to be adapted into a movie, and the person adapting it into a film is Mike Flanagan, who adapted Gerald's Game, which was long considered unadaptable.
And a fantastic film. One of our favorites of that year.
It's a great book and a fantastic film. He made some necessary changes to the story to make it into a film, and it still retains what was so incredible about the novel. So it's a fantastic movie, a fantastic adaptation that does really great service to how interesting that book is. And it's a great book. I've read it within the past couple of years, and I will probably reread it again before the year is out. I really liked it. So Dr. Sleep, when it was announced as an adaptation, it was not really certain what Flanagan would do with it. You know, what kind of approach he would have to the material. We knew who he was casting in it, and Ewan McGregor, Rebecca Ferguson, and several others. Alex Esso would play Wendy Torrance, who was famously played by Shelley Duvall in the Kubrick film, and Rebecca De Mornay in the miniseries. And so, with this knowledge, it really wasn't a whole lot. They didn't really talk about the approach to adapting the novel at all. But after having seen the trailer, it is now very apparent that Warner Brothers intended to make this a direct sequel to Kubrick's film.
Which is so insane to me. Like,
it is insane and bizarre. Why?
Well, here's the thing. When I say insane, I don't mean it's a bad idea. It is a bad idea in that you immediately have stacked the odds against this movie because of our culture's love of The Shining.
If you're going to make a movie sequel to The Shining, it has to be a movie sequel to the movie The Shining that everybody knows.
Right. And I think that was what was so surprising with the trailer, was not only that it was made clear that it was going to be a sequel to Kubrick's movie, but that they are going to draw on the imagery from that so directly. And it's been made obvious now that they are recreating scenes from Kubrick's film.
They are. And that approach, while it is totally understandable from Warner Brothers, from a studio executive's position, like, yes, you make the sequel to the film that everybody knows so that there's some cultural value and cultural cachet there. Like, if people are going to go into the theaters expecting a movie that is adjacent to The Shining, like, use the imagery that is clearly iconic, that people know about, that puts butts in seats. That's what people know is Kubrick's The Shining. It's way more famous than the novel.
It's nuts to me because obviously it's very known that Stephen King dislikes Kubrick's version. And of course he's always out there championing the stuff that is being made from his material. So he's very much on board with Dr. Sleep. So I'm wondering exactly how much they'll be pulling, because it seems like there will be an extended thing, at least what I got from the trailer, that Danny kind of walks through the memories of his time at the Overlook.
I mean, it's unclear how much of the fabric of the film will be that, because their job right now is to sell people on an idea that will put their butts in seats, which is, this is the sequel to The Shining. Like, anybody who's read Dr. Sleep, the novel, knows that the antagonist of the film is not a ghost or a haunted hotel. It is a psychic vampire or an energy vampire, or a group of energy vampires, really sort of a Near Dark-esque traveling band of people who suck the shining power out of children. The main villain is named Rose the Hat, and she will be played by Rebecca Ferguson in the film, who I think is a great choice. And she does get like one line delivery in the trailer that makes me think, oh yeah, this is her. This works. This is good. So I'm all for seeing her as that. Like, she's just so great in those Mission Impossible movies, 5 and 6. It's just like, oh yeah, okay, more of her. Ewan McGregor as Danny Torrance, fine, no problem with that. They put a big fake beard on him in a couple scenes that doesn't look too good in the trailer.
But Ewan is another, like, he's just one of those dependable guys.
Sure, and he's got enough star power for people to go, oh hey, that guy.
Hey, it's Obi-Wan. Yeah. So, I mean, here's the thing. I appreciate the boldness. Like, it's a bold move. And I have no idea if it's going to pay off either financially or just, in the actual text of the movie. But at this point, between Gerald's Game and probably more prominent to most people in the pop culture sphere, Mike Flanagan's work on the Haunting of Hill House series for Netflix,
which is one of the best Netflix original series.
At this point, Mike Flanagan has kind of earned my trust.
I agree. I'm still incredibly suspicious of the film, not necessarily because, Mike Flanagan is directing it, and I do like Mike Flanagan. Like, Oculus, I was not crazy about. I got to be honest. Oculus didn't really do a whole lot for me. It's just such an odd little movie.
I wasn't crazy, but I liked it. It was fine.
It's full of interesting ideas, and it has a premise that's like wholly unique, and really, I really love that premise. But after just how good a job he did with Gerald's Game and Hill House, I'm totally willing to see where the guy goes. And Hush as well is sort of an outlier in that it's not a supernatural horror film for him. As a Netflix original he did, it stars his wife as a woman who has a hearing impairment. I believe she's fully deaf. And there's a slasher that basically arrives at her house, and there's this home invasion story that's like fascinating. It's a great movie.
Riff on Wait Until Dark.
Yeah. Like you said, he's got my trust. I'm on his side. His other movie, Before I Wake, which was kind of abandoned for theatrical release and got eventually picked up by Netflix for distribution, is kind of an odder idea and wasn't as well embraced by audiences. I still haven't seen it, but I'm interested in it.
Yeah, I immediately put that on my watch list after this Dr. Sleep trailer.
Yeah. It's suspect because Mike Flanagan, I trust him, but he's playing with fire. Playing with the Kubrick iconography is incredibly risky. And it's not because the Kubrick film is this classic that I think is untouchable or people shouldn't mess with it. Like even in Ready Player One, which is a film I'm not exactly crazy about, neither of us are crazy about it, the Shining sequence was like the best stuff in the movie.
Go listen to our Ready Player One episode. We both are like, we were surprised at how much we loved the Shining segment of that movie.
Because it was willing to play fast and loose with iconic stuff from another movie and sort of, feel free to be a little sacrilegious with it.
Yeah, broke it.
We were way into it.
And I don't know, Dr. Sleep, that I can see that fear where the reverence might actually be a problem.
Perhaps. And this is what happens when you start playing with movies that are really, really classic. Like, Blade Runner 2049.
Miraculous.
Nerds like Blade Runner, right? But it's still not a movie that has as wide appeal as we thought it would.
No.
But nerds like it. Was it enough for Blade Runner 2049 to be a box office smash? Absolutely not. But it was a very, very, very good movie.
No, yeah,
perhaps Dr. Sleep will do the same thing.
I hope so. I of course, like everybody, have affection for the Kubrick film.
Sure.
But like I say, when we talked about in Ready Player One, I'm not against futzing with that stuff. That kind of fear excites me. I don't think that's going to be how a lot of other people approach it, but that kind of willingness to mess with the material and take it in a new way and especially continue the story, not do something that's a prequel or a side quill or anything like this. This is going to effectively canonically be a continuation of Kubrick's film. That is so terrifying, and I love that.
It is not only is it going to be a canonical canonical continuation of Kubrick's film, it is going to take source material that actually was designed by King to sort of continue what he liked about his original material that the Kubrick film didn't get. Mm-hmm. Like it's a really odd mix of chemicals that may not mix well. You have this Dr. Sleep novel that has certain ideas, and how can you warp those ideas to fit the Kubrick continuation thing? I have no clue what it's going to be like.
But that danger is exciting.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So yeah. We weren't. It's a little behind the scenes. We weren't going to cover Dr. Sleep on this show. That's changed after that trailer.
It wasn't on our radar. And often most films aren't until we start seeing footage. And now is the case where it's like, okay, we've seen footage. It's on our radar now. So expect us to cover that this November.
Well, I think I'm going to forfeit my currently consuming time because we both had plenty to say about that.
We did, and we both currently consumed it. So let's get to our comment of the week.
Yes, this week's comment on our Dragon Slayer episode comes from loyal listener Mark P. And bless Mark P. Take it away, Travis. What did Mark P. have to say?
He says, just a note, the effects in Dragon Slayer are from ILM. This was a huge and challenging film for the early days of Industrial Light and Magic, and the compositing of a dragon and not a spaceship on a relatively bright background of a non-starfield was a hell of a task. You could actually compare it to compositing in the theatrical version of the Hoth battle in The Empire Strikes Back, where you can actually see through the snowspeeder cockpit elements in order to try to mitigate the compositing issues on a snowfield. I can't disagree with the technical problems in that last act, but I think the entire team at ILM would tell you they just didn't know how to do it better. Mark P, you're 100% correct.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously called out that element, and I was thinking about the original Hoth battle scene from Empire and seeing how it looked originally and that trade-off in opacity that they had to do with all their compositing issues, that's there in the original Empire release. And obviously Dragon Slayer, it was just more difficult. It's absolutely a triumph for the time, but like you said, that especially because of that last act, that movie needs some restoration and love.
It does. I really do think it could use a little bit of cleaning up of those elements just to make the movie look as good as it could. Like the 1080p master I got didn't even have a proper anamorphic treatment. Like it still had letterboxing in the master, which is not good.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I would love somebody to give this movie the treatment it deserves to make sure that those effects from, Phil Tippett and ILM look as good as they possibly can in 2019. Mark P, thank you so much for geeking out with us on this episode. We really loved your comment.
Yeah, we like when the comments can supplement the episode, and that's why we just have great listeners who, continue to educate and expand our knowledge and your knowledge, loyal listeners. So thanks again, Mark P. That's going to wrap it up for this week. But next week, Travis, are you ready to go to the Wild Wild West?
I'm going to the Wiki Wild. I don't know about you.
That's
Wiki
right.
Wild Wild West.
Jim West, Desperado. Okay, I don't want to get a copyright notice for doing that too perfectly. Yes, next week it's time for the Wild Wild West. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Pin.
And we'll see you next week.
Dorothy.
Subscribe.
Smash that like button, Leon. All right. See you guys. Bye.